And we're live. What's going on, everyone? Happy Friday. Super excited to be here for episode number 1 of the Witcher Book Club. This is going to be super fun, super exciting to be joined here by my special guest today, one of my favorite content creators, Aziz from History of Westeros. What's going on, man?
Hey, Kyle. Good to see you. Good afternoon. Good happy Friday. Happy toss a coin to your Witcher day. And yeah, I'm excited too. I've been really having fun taking a deep dive in the books. I've read Lesser Evil twice now. I'm on my second full read through. I finished Season of Storms like 2 days ago, and I've already.
So you're all done with the books now.
Yeah, I'll finish, and now I have restarted. It's good that you asked about this because I was thinking of restarting pretty quickly, but because you wanted to do this, and I was like, yeah, I'm definitely interested in coming on to talk Lesser Evil about you or with you. So I just started right over again because it's so early on in the first book there. So yeah, I'm loving it. Great time.
I've started. I read the books a few years ago after I first started playing The Witcher in 2015, and now I'm doing my reread again ever since The Witcher Season 1 came around because I wanted to be as informed as possible for the season. We're going to do, this is mostly going to be book stuff today, but at the end we are going to do some book versus show stuff because I think that'll be cool. Really fun to kind of compare some of the stuff that was left out in some of the changes. There is some parts of the chapter that are it isn't a perfect chapter to me. So I think we'll discuss some of that. But this isn't a chronological book club. I just kind of want to go off with that. And I felt like this was the most appropriate story to start with first because the thread of the Lesser Evil is something that goes all the way out throughout every single book in the Witcher series. And I think it's something that connects so many different characters and just really the argument of ethics versus duty and also all sorts of stuff that we're going to discuss today. So we are going to do a little bit of reading from the book. I got some stuff that I want to do. Aziz has some amazing points that he wants to talk about with fairy tales. He kind of blew my mind yesterday with that when we were doing our outline. But let's do a little shout out in chat before we get into it. I know a lot of people were excited from the Witcher Addicts group. We are actually live on 5 different platforms today, which is super cool. We're in the future, man. I remember not even having a cell phone, and now we're all, streaming on 5 different platforms. So hello, Twitch, Facebook, on 3 different platforms on Facebook, the Witcher Addicts group, Geek Chat 1, also my personal Facebook page, and here on YouTube. So really, really excited to see all of you. Got some awesome people in chat.
Streaming on multiple platforms. That phrase wouldn't have even made sense 20 years ago when these books were written. They'd be like, what does that mean? Is that some new magic term? Yeah. You have to go to Arathusa to learn how to stream on multiple platforms.
It's crazy, man. It really is. We got Stacy from the Witcher Addicts, one of the many great admins. Chrissy of Oldstone. The original David Adams is in here. Haven't seen you in a while.
Original?
Yeah. Alex,
no fakes.
Lady H, John Haymaker, the Bandersnatch, John. We said Rick Hoppy. I'm drinking some of your Ethiopian Sadamo coffee. Really delicious. Katrin, we have, I see Shelby in there, Day Education. There's some people saying toss a coin to your YouTuber. Actually, you know what? I'm going to go on and I'll talk about a cool little giveaway that we're going to do after. If we get 5 people to hit that join button today, I'll give away a copy of The Last Wish hardcover.
Oh, cool. Yeah, come on, people.
So if we hit 5 join buttons today, I'll give a copy of The Last Wish live today. But let's get into it, Aziz. Let's start off with talking a little bit about what Andrzej does in The Last Wish. So he has a love for fairy tales. And this is especially prominent within The Last Wish because there's a bunch of different short stories. And especially in this story, The Lesser Evil, what he does is he turns the story of going to save the trope of saving this princess right on its head. Let's start with that. Let's talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, let's do that. I think it's really neat, and it's put me on guard during my reread to look for future parallels like this, because this is what got me. I started doing a little bit of research about this, and of course, one of the places I started was the Witcher wiki. It's very well developed. You got to be careful to not mix up your show and game and book canon. It's you just got to be clear on that. But there's just one line in the description about Renfrey, and it says she is she is depicted as a more brutal Snow White. I'm like, what? What does that mean? And so I go look up the history of Snow White, and I'm like, holy crap! There's all these parallels, like a ton of parallels to Renfrey. And then as I'm reading a little past it, I'm reading the story of the ball and Pavetta and Dooney and all that. Mm-hmm. And that in that one, Geralt mentions a woman running out without her slipper, which is Cinderella. So I was like, wait a minute. So now I'm just on guard for more fairy tale references, but let me not get too far ahead of myself here. So let's see here. What we get started with is, as you said, Lesser Evil isn't the first novel or isn't the first short story in this book, but it's close, and it's close enough that anyone who's seen the show or read the books, it's not a big change. And Geralt's is recovering from his injury from fighting the Striga, which is the first story,
which is much more grievous in the books. Like, he is this close from dying. Yeah,
he's basically lucky that someone was around, kind of. And it's not, obviously, it's not in the book. It's not Triss. It's Neneki, the high priestess of Melitele. Yeah, or I don't know how to say that, but
Temple of as the audiobook person says it, the Temple of Melitele.
Melitele. Okay, I like that. That's cool. Yeah. I'll be learning all these gradually. and so there's he's having a series of memories, and as certain things happen in the current time frame, certain things get mentioned, and that triggers memories, or at least it triggers the author to write about certain stories. And for example, in this case, some uppity knight is very upset that Geralt would deign to be in their city, and he wants him to leave. And so, as one of the things he says, he shouts that he's the Butcher of Blaviken, like that he doesn't belong here. And of course, within a few paragraphs, we're thrown in the past to show what the heck that dude's talking about. Like, what's the Butcher of Blaviken? And so that's how the show decided to start, was showing him as immediately becoming the Butcher of Blaviken. So it was just a decision they made there. But as you said, it sets the tone for a lot of the themes that are part of The Witcher through the entire currently 8 books, as well as, I suppose, the game and certainly the show. Themes, like you say, well, some of these will go into more detail, but just to run through them. Destiny, like you said, the lesser evil, making a choice as to what is good and what is not necessarily what is good and what is evil, because this is, I hesitate to compare it to Game of Thrones too much, but that is one thing they have in common, is there's a lot of moral ambiguity, a theme that's omnipresent, which is a realistic theme. I did actually come up with one way that I could describe the world of The Witcher that is in terms of how people would have described Game of Thrones, which is that Game of Thrones is like if you take a medieval society and add some fantasy to it. This is more like The Witcher is more like if you take, it's sort of the opposite. If you take a high fantasy world and add humans to it. And so that's a lot of, so that basically humans have to deal with all these crazy, unbelievable things. And fairy tale. So one of those ways he does that is he leans into fairy tales and say, well, what if this was a real story? If this wasn't a fairy tale, like say where George R. R. Martin does this with myth, right? Well, he'll do things like the Grey King and all these things that touch on human world myth. Andrzej is doing this with human fairy tales or real world fairy tales and saying, well, what if this was real? What detail do I need to add to this? How do I make this realistic in a high fantasy world? Like, if Snow White was a real person, what would it have been like when she was out in the world and running around and doing all these things? What would it have been like if she was actually with 7 gnomes instead of 7 dwarves, and these gnomes were kind of bad people? And what if Snow White was had a normal human reaction to being rejected by her parents and hunted down, which would mean most people that are in that situation, they would get pretty dark themselves and might do some hunting of people on their own and do some killing and of their own. And so that's what Renfri became. So I don't want to just keep rambling here forever. So maybe this is a good time to kick it back to you. But yeah, just in general, that's the world I think we're set up, and I'm excited to keep learning this and have a little more nuance, a little more succinct things to say about it. But at this point, that's where I'm at.
Well, you referenced Game of Thrones, and I think this is something that was, kind of put right in our faces within Game of Thrones as well. And this chapter asks us the question, is it fundamentally wrong to take a life, and is it ethical? From our perspective, it can be argued that Stregobor is wrong, right? Because he wants to murder Renfri. From Stregobor's perspective, she is evil because she is born under this eclipse. He's personally got this belief because of this prophecy that she's going to, these females that are born of magic, and he's part of this, like literally a witch hunt. If that's kind of what if you want to, like, this persecution, like they were literally going after children, which, like, you ask yourself, like, would you kill a baby? Me and Aziz actually talked about this in our last live stream together, and we both said, obviously, we wouldn't kill a child, right? But that is a question that is asked. Is it fundamentally right to do that? And the crazy thing is like, Stregobor asks Geralt to commit this unlawful act. However, the Witchers and Geralt have their own code of ethics, even though it seems like at times he is only working for money and, providing a service to the people. Geralt's North Star isn't guided by ego like people like Stregobor. So this chapter really goes through that. And this is one of the themes that we learned in Game of Thrones, and that was super prevalent. It is super prevalent through all the Witcher books, but also season 1, is that sometimes humans can be the worst monsters as we do commit these unlawful acts and we ask others to do things on our behalf. So Geralt is put in this incredibly tough situation in this chapter. He either has to kill Stregobor, which is an unlawful act, right? Or he has to kill Renfri, and either way, his position, his reputation, Witchers live upon their reputation. It's going to be worse either way. So he has to kind of do this duty versus ethics. Do I save people in the market, or do I kill? Do I kill this wizard and give in to this person's revenge? It's really something that is deeply ingrained through every single book of the series.
Yeah, and I love it because it presents us with a moral conundrum, which is really interesting conflict, which is, like you say, what's his right play? What's the right play here? Both of their stories have holes in them. Both of them have motivation to lie a little bit, if not a lot. And in this world, I find this super compelling. Like you say, there's sometimes people are the worst, and that's something that we in the real world we know that already, because we don't have this alternative. We don't have vampires and griffins and manticores and silver-tongued devils and armies of elves and and all these things. So in their world, it's different. It's the line of where does human end and monster begin, or what defines monster, is something that Geralt constantly struggles with, something that the Witchers are supposed to have a bit of a code on, but as we find out, it's not quite so simple, because not every Witcher follows the code, and not all the places that train Witchers have the same philosophy, et cetera, et cetera. And of course, there's so few of them now. And that means that they have to make these decisions on their own, like what's evil, and what's an intelligent life form, and what has a right to life, and what needs to be killed because it's too dangerous. I think that's super interesting, and a great thing for a fantasy world. It's a real world topic applied to a fantasy world. It's kind of like what I was trying to lead in with before. It gives it a lot of depth. Which right off the bat, I didn't know The Witcher would have so much depth, and to have that be one of the first things I'm presented with was like, oh, I'm interested in this. I want to keep going. It really was a great place to start.
One, this connects to destiny, this idea of destiny and this power of choice that we're talking about, Aziz. Action versus inaction. One thing that was, one passage from the chapter that, it says destiny in the first word in the sentence. Destiny has many faces. Mine is beautiful on the outside and hideous on the inside. She has stretched her bloody talons towards me. Of course, he's not being completely truthful in this situation, and Geralt's kind of trying to do his best Sherlock Holmes impression, but this is from the perspective of Stregobor. He has this ego. He's lived for hundreds and hundreds of years. He has this rooted belief that he has this right, this entitlement and right to do this because of his belief.
Yeah, that's a recurring theme that's only a little bit touched on here, expanded greatly in the world of future stories, is the fact that a lot of these mages are meddlers. They believe that they have this moral justification to do things that can cause great harm as long as it causes good in the long run. And it's a metaphor in a lot of ways for a lot of technology that people invent that can maybe solve a problem or help something, but also causes a lot of damage or has a lot of side effects. And then these creators just shrug and ignore those side effects while focusing on the positive aspects of what they did. Now that's a really, like, for example, take some company that makes some great product, but it's also dumping huge amounts of pollution in the river nearby. This doesn't even have to be a real company for you to understand that metaphor. In that water, let's say they're dumping this toxic waste, new species of fish emerge, and those fish, I don't know, they cause problems. Let's say they're mutant fish that crawl out of the water and start attacking people. We need to make it a little more high fantasy. We need to pull it back into high fantasy here. So
are we talking about The Simpsons here?
Yeah, exactly. So that's the kind of attitude you see a lot of these mages, and it's also a recurring theme that power corrupts, which is a very understandable real world human concept. So what happens if you're a mage that's really powerful, and after 80 years you get a little more corrupted than, let's say, you're 200 years old, then you're 300, and then you're 400, and you're 500. And I don't know how old Stregobor is in the book, but he's like 500 years old in the show. So I think I'm guessing he's roughly 500 years ish in the books as well. And so if you're a guy who's slowly getting corrupt, or maybe not slowly, you're really, really, really corrupt after 500 years, because this keeps going unless something slows that down. And a lot of times there's nothing to slow that down, because someone that old, the only peers they have are other people in the same spot on the same negative growth arc.
And Geralt calls him out for that, by the way. He says, "You've not changed a bit, Stregobor," Geralt grimaced. "You're talking nonsense while making wise and meaningful faces. Can't you speak normally?" I can, sighed the wizard. "I can, if that makes you happy. I made it all the way here, hiding and running from a monstrous being that wants to murder me." And this is kind of foreshadowing, because he has to deal with the humans in the town. He's like, okay, he's fighting this monster, but like they're the monsters. And so I'll go a little bit further. He goes, "Men hang from trees at the roadside. Brigands slash merchants' throats. At every step in town, you trip over corpses in the gutters. In palaces, they stab each other with daggers, and somebody falls under the table at a banquet every minute, blue from poisoning. I'm used to it. So why should a death threat impress me? And one directed at you at that." So he kind of calls him out for, he's like, listen, I know who you are. You haven't changed. I recognize that. And I'm sorry to know what you're up to.
Yeah, he's like, basically, he gives all these fancy reasons, which, if he was a credible guy, might mean something. But we know from the beginning that he lied about something that Geralt was involved in that caused Geralt harm. He lied to a king who's Geralt's domain when Geralt was in his domain, and so he knows Stregobor is capable of lying. And so yeah, he's like, "Look, man, I hear this story, but it really just sounds like she hates you and wants to kill you, and that's pretty human to me. Like, maybe she's a jerk, but maybe you're a jerk." And he's like, this doesn't rise to the level of monster or anything like that. And so Stregobor, he leans into that, saying, "Well, look, there is magic involved here. She is mutated, blah, blah, blah." And then he gives some evidence, some of which is a little bit compelling, some of which is not. But then when, eventually when he talks to Renfrey, it's the same thing where some of what she says is compelling and some of it's like, I don't know about that.
Yeah, right. Geralt definitely connects with Renfrey a bit more, and we're going to talk about that because
absolutely.
they've had similar situations, and that's why he, I wouldn't say holds her in high regard, but like keeps her memory. Like it's definitely something that's difficult for him because of what he's personally experienced. He knows that she's experienced the same.
Yeah, they have a lot more in common than he does with Stregobor. Not only are mages and witchers apparently a little bit occasionally like at odds of like they're a similar profession but different, so they kind of like snipe at each other sometimes. But well, on the other hand, like you say, Geralt and Renfrey have a lot in common. They're both kind of lived out without their parents. They're both altered and really good at fighting, and so Geralt understands revenge, wanting to kill someone that harmed them. Where he does not understand wanting to experiment on people. He does not understand locking women in towers and cutting them apart in half and things like that. So it's definitely, even though there's bad on both sides, he understands Renfrey's more, which makes it all the more tragic and ironic that that's the side he decides to, because she's threatening innocence before,
he's essentially presented with an impossible choice.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's really interesting. And Geralt, another thing about Geralt is he's naturally suspicious. He's always like suspicious of people in power. So as soon as Stregobor starts talking, he's already looking for the lie. And from a literary point of view, Stregobor is presented as an illusionist. Like that's his specialty, is illusion. So it's like, okay, well, this guy's all super practiced at deception. This guy has 500 years of deception like under his belt. So it's like, I'm already, and right away Geralt figures it out. It's one of the great themes of the books is Geralt's figuring things out from just a seed of intention. Geralt figures out their entire plan and then he thinks through it. And I love reading how he thinks through it. In this case, he's like, oh, really, Master Aryan? So that's why you took Master Aryan's name as an homage to him. It's like, nah, bro, I get it. You're in hiding.
he calls him out. He calls him out here again. He goes, our last meeting, said Geralt, was in the court of King Idi of Kovir. I'd come to be paid for killing the MS Bina, which had been terrorizing the neighborhood. You and your compatriot Zavis vied with each other to call me a charlatan, a thoughtless murdering machine, and a scavenger. Consequently, not only didn't Idi pay me a penny, he gave me 12 hours to leave Kovir, which is another foreshadowing of what's kind of going on here. Like he has to get out of Blaviken. So it kind of touches on what you said there. Yeah.
And then you get the little bit of the recurring like kitschy humor, just like slight humor where he says, and I barely made it because his hourglass was broken. It's like that's so funny. I laugh out loud so often reading these books. So I found a little quote which is really good for describing a recurring theme here. Then I'll tell you who said this quote after I read it. It's pretty quick. Too many contemporary fantasies take the easy way out by externalizing the struggle. So the heroic protagonist need only smite the evil minions of the dark power to win the day. And you can tell the evil minions because they're inevitably ugly and they wear all black. I wanted to stand much of that on its head. In real life, the hardest aspect of the battle between good and evil is determining which is which. Now, I'm sorry to bring up Game of Thrones again, but that's George R. R. Martin.
We're going to do that a lot. We're going to do that a lot today.
It's fine, yeah.
This chapter actually has a very similar vibe to a lot of like the Arya chapters where she's like journeying around and learning a lot. I like just the descriptiveness is very similar, I find, in the way that like the atmosphere of the chapter. Sorry, go ahead.
I get that. I think you're right. Yeah. And of course it's natural for us to compare. Like, I don't want to compare what bothers me is when someone's like, is it the next Game of Thrones? Like, well, that's it's its own thing, but it's not wrong to compare things that we both like to help illuminate different themes and different aspects of it. That's the kind of comparison I'm cool with and I like. I think I enjoy that. And of course, so many of us are super familiar with Game of Thrones. So it's a natural place to make a few comparisons. But yeah, we could get carried away with that, but we'll try not to.
So Geralt arrives on the busiest day of the year. Let's go there.
Yeah, let's do some rundown. Yeah. Arrives on the busiest day of the year. which is pretty important because there's all these people around, and that's crucial because part of Renfri's plan is to use the tree dam ultimatum, which is a part of the plotting. That's how Geralt figures out what's going to happen. She mentions it kind of casually and doesn't explain it, and then later he finds out the tree dam ultimatum was in a nearby town. Some brigands were imprisoned, and Sivril, the half-elf, and some of his buddies took a bunch of hostages, took a river ferry hostages, and they started throwing people into the water to kill them, and said, hey, if you don't set these prisoners free, we're going to set our prisoners free. We're going to kill all these peasant hostages. So it was another situation of the lesser evils. Like, well, do we let these guys out, establish lawlessness, and have criminals back on the street? Or do we, negotiate with terrorists and let these people live and consider it the lesser evil? So the mayor of this town does what he considered the lesser evil and let the people go. And so that's how Geralt figures out what Renfri's plan is, which is to murder people until Stregobor until Stregobor comes out. But it doesn't work, or it probably isn't going to work, or maybe we don't know if it would ever work because Stregobor doesn't care. He's like, yeah, kill them. I don't care. I'm a 500-year-old guy who thinks I'm special, and their lives don't mean that much to me. Like, he was willing to throw women in prison and cut and experiment on them on the suspicion that they were cursed. And we know for damn sure he cut open innocent women, because he said he alluded, he's like, yeah, it started to become difficult to single them out, which is his way of saying, yeah, we killed some innocents. And so it's interesting. It's quite the twist that you have this brutal lesser evil situation, and in fact it's even worse than it seems, because they're both worse. And they're both willing to go farther to do what they want to do. Renfri's willing to go so far to get her revenge, and Stregobor is like, well, what do those people have to do with me? I'm not responsible for their lives. Nasty.
Yeah, he's a very deceitful guy, and this is something I don't want to spoil too much of the last couple of books, but we do see we do see people like Yennefer who have acquired power and learn how to use magic, who do it for more, I wouldn't say good, but for survival and stuff like that, as opposed to people like Stregobor who have this kind of larger, more complex plan. There's another mage who I'm not going to name, who is just absolutely insane. He does some crazy stuff in the books, and he's a big time villain.
And creating creatures is a common enough thing. It's like, if I could briefly suggest Game of Thrones again, it's like blood magic. They're trying to create genetic monsters. It's like that thing. Like
Maesters, Shelby kind of talked about that earlier, kind of like the Franken Mountain,
Yeah, exactly. And almost every creature most of the monsters in the Witcher world on the continent are creations of magic, and that's why there's this distinction with silver. And not all, but many monsters, especially those created by magic, can be harmed by silver, and ones that are kind of naturally, quote unquote, naturally occurring, steel will suffice for them. And that's a neat kind of little theme, because even in the real world, silver has strange and this sounds like woo, this sounds like pseudoscience, but it's not. Silver has actual antibiotic properties that even now science does not fully understand. You put a silver coin in a barrel of water, and it's somewhat effective as a disinfectant.
Well,
it's very strange.
well, it's really interesting. When a star collapses, when it implodes on itself, it actually disperses all sorts of rich metals like gold and stuff like that actually creates life on other planets and stuff like that.
Yeah, that's so cool.
So that's kind of a thing. There's a really interesting comment on Facebook from Meg Nugent Hopkins, and she says Stregobor equals Melisandre. They do kind of have that fanaticism to them, in a way where Stregobor believes this prophecy, Melisandre believes this prophecy, and tries to manipulate people to get power so she can do the things that she wants. Also, Qyburn, he uses Cersei and other people to get his power so he can do experiments. Stregobor is similar to those characters that have been mentioned by a couple of people. And I know we're referencing Game of Thrones, but we're going to keep on doing that.
So. No, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, Melisandre, because Melisandre believes the ends justify the means. She thinks that, hey, if I don't, it's like what's in her mind, killing a few babies is nothing compared to every single person in the whole world dying. And it's kind of hard to argue with that, but the problem comes into, well, how do we know you're right? And quite clearly, Melisandre's wrong about a lot of things. Same thing here. Stregobor thinks he's right, but there's not much proof, and there is some evidence that he's been wrong. As we said, he flat out says they captured some girls and experimented on that turned out to be innocent. So that's the same thing conundrum you're presented with Game of Thrones. Well, what if Edric Storm what if killing him doesn't do anything? Then you just murdered a baby for nothing, and holy crap, that makes you evil as it gets. So what do you do? Is this curse real or not? Is the curse of the Black Sun real?
Let's talk a little bit about the curse of the Black Sun, actually.
Yeah,
so basically, I'm gonna go find the exact page here, and actually, I'm right here. So. Don't get all puffed up like a frog, magician. Tell me what's threatening you. We'll see what can be done. Have you heard of the curse of the Black Sun? But of course, except that it was called the Mania of Mad Eltibald, after the wizard who started the lark and caused dozens of girl from good, even noble families to be murdered or imprisoned in towers. So we got that Rapunzel, a little bit of a Rapunzel thing here too, which is a story that's definitely illuminated in another short story.
And Renfrey has really, really, really long hair when she runs out in the woods and then has to cut it and says it's never grown back properly. So that, I think you're right. I think you just nailed one there. That's awesome.
They were supposed to have been possessed by demons, cursed, contaminated by the Black Sun, because that's what, in your pompous jargon, you called the most ordinary eclipse in the world. I love how
he talks. It's great.
Eltibald wasn't mad at all. He deciphered the writing on the dark menhirs on tombstones in the Wasgor necropolises and examined in legends and traditions of Weretots. Geez, all these words are so difficult to pronounce. And I'm dyslexic, by the way, so that's why I'm reading it super slow. All of them spoke of the eclipse in no uncertain terms. The Black Sun was to announce the imminent return of Lilith, which is a reference to Lilith, this goddess of the underworld that would bring this apocalypse and the extermination of the human race. Lilith's path was to be prepared by 60 women wearing gold crowns who would fill the river valleys with blood. And then, Geralt says nonsense.
Nonsense, bro. But yeah, and it's so super cool. There's all this. I love the mention of the Bobolax and the Wasgor and all these, which
Weretot.
the Weretots are a different race, a different species, but while the Wasgor are just like early humans, there's like a lost human culture. And so there's, according to Eltibald, there's evidence for this in their mythology. And so Stregobor is a believer in that. But it's almost like you get a sense that there's a chance they're right, but it's probably more of like a conspiracy theory, a modern equivalent of like one of those kind of things where people believe something that really does not have much evidence. And the evidence for it comes from old crazy people. It's like, well, why? Just because it's old doesn't mean it's accurate. I mean, the crazy people carved things in rocks thousands of years ago also.
This is a lot like the speakings of Old Nan and the prophecy of Azor Ahai. I want to point out this next paragraph here, Aziz. He says nonsense. And what's more, it doesn't rhyme. All decent predictions rhyme. Everyone knows what Eltibald and the Council of Wizards have in mind at the time. You took advantage of a madman's raving to strengthen your own authority, to break up alliances, ruin marriage allegiances, stir up dynasties. In a word, to tangle the strings of crown puppets even more. And here you're lecturing me about predictions, which any old storyteller at the marketplace would be ashamed of. So we see a little bit of, we heard the Melisandre comparison earlier, this idea of, and with Stannis burns his daughter, I'm not sure if he's going to do it in the books, but, causing people to get this thought in their heads to do these things, commit these unlawful acts to engorge their egos. It's really crazy, man. And like this idea of prophecy, and Geralt shoots it down. He's like, listen, he doesn't believe in destiny, but this definitely, there's a lot more to this, and I don't want to spoil it too much, but there's a lot more to this, especially because we see that with Ciri and Pavetta, and we know that Queen Calantha protected Ciri and didn't even know Pavetta had the gift because it skipped to Calantha. So that's something that is definitely in connection to that. We see, so pretty crazy, man. The curse of the Black Sun is definitely something that is mentioned in later books as well.
Absolutely. And I think it's just a little bit more detail. What he says is 60 girls that will, something like 60 women with golden crowns. And so they
golden
think
crowns.
So they interpret that as blonde and
King's blood, essentially, or Queen's blood. Yeah.
Yeah. It's a really similar type of detail. And Renfrey has blonde hair in the books, and so she qualifies.
And she's a princess.
And she's a princess. So he thought golden-haired women of royal blood. And well, there is, as I see some people in the chat, at least one person pointing out that Renfrey has certain things that boxes she checks off, like she does seem to have some magic resistance, which implies that something's up with her, but it doesn't imply, it isn't actually evidence for the curse of the Black Sun. It's just evidence that she's got some mutations, or that she's magical in some way. One doesn't necessarily prove the other. It does prove that she's different, but it doesn't prove the prophecies. And that's the real trick, because, well, prophecies can be real, but it certainly is hard to prove them. And that's, and of course, a thing at the end of this short story is that Geralt doesn't want Stregobor to vivisect Renfrey's body.
Well, it's really interesting that you mentioned mutations, because Geralt talks about, there's no such thing as the gold dragon. And he's kind of proven wrong about that. He says, and he kind of, this relates to that. He goes, you've seen all sorts of mutations, you say. The magician raised his head. And how many of them have you slaughtered for money in keeping your witcher's calling? Well, because one can have a wolf's fang and go no further than bawling them at trollops and taverns, and one can have a wolf's nature too and attack children.
Yeah. And we also get some, just like we're supposed to, I suppose, we get evidence that the prophecy is either wrong or being misinterpreted. For example, here's where we start to get in some of the Snow White comparisons. One of the main businesses in Snow White is one of the main pieces of Snow White is the queen, the evil queen stepmother, who has the mirror that she asks who's the fairest of them all. And Geralt even says that line in the Lesser Evil. He says, I bet she asked, who's the fairest of them all, and it's Nehelenium's mirror in The Witcher. Yeah. And the mirror supposedly tells Renfrey's stepmother Aridea that Aridea is going to be killed by Renfrey in the future, along with a bunch of other people. And later we find, and Stregobor tells Geralt that this happened. But Renfrey tells Geralt that she didn't kill her mother, but she wanted to. She wanted to kill her stepmother. She wanted to kill her badly and wanted her to die suffering, and didn't. But she's like, no, I didn't kill her, so she just died. But Stregobor is like, oh yeah, she killed her. So I believe Renfrey on this one. Like, if Renfrey, she's like, yeah, I wanted to kill her, but couldn't get my hands on her. I wanted to torture her to death. I believe that. So it's compelling. It's believable. So that would mean that the mirror lied, or Aridea, the stepmother, lied, or Stregobor lied, or multiple people lied. So it either means the prophecy was wrong or misinterpreted. So it opens the door for this. It shows that possibility, which I think is interesting. It just adds to the whole mystery and the conundrum of it all. It makes it even more difficult for Geralt to figure out what's happening.
I have the quote right here, Aziz. Aridea often turned to the mirror with the usual question. I take it, interrupted Geralt. Who is the fairest of them all? I know all Nehelenia's mirrors are either polite or broken. So it talks a little bit about, the truth there. Here's another quote in relation to that. Then 4 years later, I received news, and this is going a little bit of the Snow White, the fairy tale stuff. Then 4 years later, I received news from Aridea. She's tracked down the little one who was living in Macaham with 7 gnomes.
7 gnomes.
Whom she managed to convince it was more profitable to rob merchants on the road than pollute their lungs with dust from mines.
Yeah, it would have been a little too on the nose if he had said 7. but there you go. And we also have in this tale where we get both sides of it, where Renfrey describes chasing after Stregobor, and Stregobor describes Renfrey chasing after him. We get a couple of different versions of their story, and there's a lot more Snow White references. One thing that I love to point out here too is that, or not point out, that I wonder is, how did Renfrey keep finding him? Like, this guy's an illusionist and a mage and all that, but she keeps tracking him down, and I really wonder, like, it maybe implies even more magical ability on her side, because she also did display some prophetic, like, source ability there. And while we're told that sources often don't even know what they said while they're in their trance, well, if she had her buddies around, her gnomes or something, someone was there maybe to tell her what she said. I don't know. But yeah, so she spends time as a bandit named Shrike, and Shrikes are little murder birds. They impale like little lizards and bugs on thorns, and just leave them there to eat later, or to make it easier to pull pieces off of them. And Renfrey was impaling her victims according to the stories. She does not like this name, which may imply that the stories are exaggerated. I could believe it either way. Like, she's pretty nasty, but she's not necessary. But also, that doesn't mean she did this. So I believe she's capable of this. That doesn't mean she actually did it.
Well, one thing that's really interesting too, and me and you talked about the apple yesterday.
Yeah,
which is really interesting, and it's, Aridea sent an assassin out for Renfrey, and then in the show, this is cool that we can talk a little bit about the show. But we see, and we the apple or the pomegranate is often, when it's used, it's often a declaration of war. Like, it's like this thing. It's something that's aggressive, and he's just holding it like that, and it's like, okay, they were going to give her this poisoned apple, and then we see this war later between these two people, like this long history that comes later on. So that's a really interesting thing that you pointed out to me yesterday. I was like, oh yeah, like the poisoned apple. I was like, shit.
Yeah, I'll run through real quick all the other like straight comparisons to Snow White, and I'm sure there's more because I'm not super familiar with Snow White. I had to go look it up, and now this is inspiring me. It's strange to hear myself say this. It's inspiring me to kind of relearn some of these older fairy tales so I can be aware of them when I find the references in the books, because I know they're there.
It's been years since I've read or studied them or anything like that.
Yeah, like I've got to go learn Cinderella again and all the Grimm's fairy tales and all these things. So yeah, so Snow White was blonde and had stunning blue-green eyes. That's what Renfrey has. There's the stepmother queen thing, which is in both stories. It's I don't think the character even has the name in Snow White, or she's given a variety of names. Snow White's been retold and retold a million times, so there's so many versions of it. But the classic element of the stepmother queen who asks the magic mirror, who's the fairest of them all. The mirror makes predictions, and because of these predictions, the stepmother queen acts. And in both cases, they act with murder, and it's a little more, like we said at the beginning, Andrzej Sapowski, he wanted to add realism to it. So what's happening here is the stepmother queen wants to remove Renfrey because of dynastic reasons. She's like, I want my kids to inherit. Now that perfectly fits. It's very understandable for all of us Game of Thrones fans. And then, so we have the look, we have the stepmother queen, we have the magic mirror. Then in Snow White, she thinks she's disposed of the stepmother queen thinks she's disposed of Snow White. She goes to ask the mirror who's the fairest of them all, and it still says Snow White. That's how she realizes Snow White's still alive. In The Witcher, Renfrey is taken out to the woods by a thug, and the thug rapes her and beats her, but Renfrey kills the thug with a brooch, which is part of the Snow White myth, like a comb in her hair that like takes some of her power away. So in this sense, Andres is saying she takes that by taking the comb out, she's able to use it rather than have it, impede her.
And that's what Geralt puts on his sword, by the way, in the show.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I missed that. You're right. Very good catch. Hell yeah. We have the plot element where they're thought dead. Snow White is believed dead. Renfrey is believed dead. Then we have the 7 gnomes versus the 7 dwarves. Of course, the 7 dwarves are kind of like basically good guys who take her in. They give her room and board in exchange for, her being like a housekeeper. So it's not the best arrangement, but it's a big improvement on her situation. But the gnomes in Renfrey's world are like bandits, basically, as far as we're told. Then we have the poison apple incident where, both of them are given a poison apple. Then we have the weirdest one. This was, I thought was so weird. Because I didn't realize it was a Snow White reference. I'm like, Strykerboard talks about how Renfrey found him, comes at him, and he turns her into crystal and then puts her in the mountain and brings down the mine on it. And Geralt, I love how Geralt's like, sloppy work, bro. and then it's hilarious because in The Witcher he says, then there was this fashion where lots of princes were really just, it was a fad for princes to rescue princesses in towers, and so a prince from some faraway land gets the curse reversed, so she's freed from her crystal prison. In Snow White, we have the glass coffin where
yes,
the poison apple is lodged in her throat, so when it becomes dislodged, she wakes up and the prince frees her. And so it's the same thing. A prince marries her, and it's this nameless prince.
Geralt stays in the tomb for the Striga, and that's how he helps transfer. He has to stay there overnight and like do this thing for the Striga. So that's another great thing with a coffin. Good point.
I didn't make the connection with the sarcophagus staying overnight. That's a great point with the Striga. You're totally right. And then and then of course it's inverted from there. And in Snow White, that's basically it. The prince marries Snow White and realizes the stepmother was trying to do awful things, and the stepmother is killed. Here, the trope is inverted. Aridea just dies because it's been so long, and Stregobor says Renfrey did it, but Renfrey's like, no, I didn't do that. And Renfrey also kills this prince that rescues him, or supposedly kills him. We don't know. Doesn't necessarily kill him. Maybe actually what we're told is his brother kills him, and Renfrey hooks up with the brother. The brother kills like all the brothers and the father to take over, and then Renfrey just leaves. So we're not sure if that story is even true because it comes from Stregobor, and it's kind of over the top, but it very much it fills out all the Snow White aspect of the story. And so when you're reading it, it's like, boy, this is really weird. This is kind of random and kooky. This encasing her in crystal, throwing her in a mountain, the princes having a fat. I enjoyed it because it's so weird. But I had no idea that he was just like fitting all the Snow White elements, and that just makes it gives me more understanding, but also makes it even funnier because it's just brutal Snow White, man. Like what?
And there's a little bit of a Red Riding Hood reference as Maud Mary, like so many different fairy tales. It's really honestly crazy. If you go, oh, is Aziz there? Aziz? Okay, hopefully we'll get him back. He's back.
Yeah.
Aziz, surprise. Sorry.
Surprise. You were talking, I think. Something about
No, I was just saying someone mentioned in the chat as well. Let me
Red Riding Hood,
yeah, when she's in the forest and all of that. So that's great. There's small little references. Like I went back and read this chapter 3 or 4 times now, and I always find something, there's something new. You know what I mean? And like you're like, for example, by the way, everyone, if you don't know, Aziz is doing a thing called Valerie Reedus on his channel. A lot of A Song of Ice and Fire people here, like talking about the Bran stuff, the Brienne of Tarth stuff. You know, one of the first lines between Brienne and Jaime in A Storm of Swords, calling her sir. You know what I mean? Is that what you would want? You know, this kind of this playfulness, this foreshadowing. And Andre's just so playful with that.
Very playful. Yeah, he's got a really, really strong sense of humor. He loves the jokes. He loves the irony. He loves sarcasm. And I'm glad that the show catches
satire,
a good bit of that as well. Yeah, the irreverence rather for everything. Just having just keeping it fun. Even you can have these very serious dark themes, but also have you know, the comic relief and the nods to the reader and these real world links that make us smile.
So yeah, Snow White is a huge one. Other people have been referencing, you know, just like other fairy tales. Just overall, the chapter that is one thing that we wanted to point out, and I think that, you know, it's a little bit harder to see that in the show because you get a limited amount of time. It's the first episode, but that is something that, you know, that is beautiful about the books, that you can really get so deeply in.
How about that news that it's apparently the best premiere ever for a Netflix show?
76 million viewers.
Oh yeah.
And there's been some great news. Apparently Christopher Hivju might be playing Nivellen in season 2.
That would be awesome. I certainly saw that news. At this point, nothing to get excited about yet, but definitely a reason to cross those fingers, I'd say.
Also, some news that they're casting Dykstra, an actor from Outlander, who's a Redanian spy, a great character.
Yeah,
really.
That's a really neat thing. That's I believe we touched on this last time, talking about how this world is more Renaissance Gothic rather than medieval. So there's more civilizations, a little more advanced. There's a little more technology. So you have characters like Dykstra who are like a spy master, but that's more of but in a more modern sense, not modern, but more modern than say Varys. But similar, where you're paying for whispers, you're connected to so many threads, and just by nature of your job, you're not terribly trustworthy. So yeah, Dykstra, I hope there's a lot of potential for an excellent character there, because he's a great book character, and a good actor would really boost that potential.
Now we're going all over. We're just so into The Witcher, and it's so great because apparently, you know, the person. We'll get back to the book here in a second. The CEO for Netflix has basically said this is like their flagship show now. It says that this is something that's going to get many seasons. This is going to be season after seasons. So it does look like, and I mean, this is only the first season. Look at what happened with Game of Thrones after the first season. I haven't got until season 3. Where it just became this huge phenomenon. I think the same thing is going to happen with The Witcher. Not necessarily maybe with the level of Game of Thrones, because, you know,
it would be so hard for anything to reach that level. But hey, if it gets half that level, it's one of the biggest shows of all time. Well, it kind of already is. But if it maintains this, then it'll go down as. And you're right, it's got potential to reach that level. It would just be so hard for anyone ever to do that again. But maybe. Don't say never.
So we talked a lot. We talked about, you know, Stregobor trying to convince. We're going to get back to the book a little bit here, and we'll do some questions after in the chat, by the way, because I see some awesome questions. We'll definitely get to that as we're going through our outline here. So we went through Stregobor with Geralt. Let's talk a little bit about you know, Renfrey, the conversation with Renfrey and Geralt, and then, you know, kind of Geralt trying to talk Renfrey out of, you know, doing that whole situation.
Right on. Well, they certainly bond, like we touched on earlier. They bond on a few things, like how they have some things in common, some similar things in their background, and of course they're attracted to each other, which helps them. Unlike Stregobor, Geralt is he's negatively disposed towards Stregobor because the things they don't have in common, and because he doesn't respect Stregobor, things he does, and he doesn't respect their prior encounters where Stregobor was dishonest. Whereas with Renfrey, he's a little more predisposed to believe her because they have these things in common, and because he's into her. He's attracted to her, and she's attracted to him. Or if she's attracted, it's not entirely clear she's attracted to him. She might just be
because she seduces him in a way.
It's a recurring theme that he gets seduced, but
magically.
But he's also a good-looking guy, so it's kind of like, well, you can kind of picture like, well, I don't mind seducing this guy. Like if I have to bang some dude to get my way, may as well be Geralt of Rivia. Like, and
he's a legendary character. Like like we hear, like there's stories written about him, and like there's Witcher, like people employ Witchers, but Geralt is like the best Witcher. You know what I mean? He's like he's like, okay, if we're gonna hire a guy, let's get that White Wolf, you know what I mean?
And we're told this is in part because he survived these mutations.
Trial of the Grasses,
Yeah, and he did better. He had more resistance and stamina than most, so he was given So what do? They just experiment on him more. So this is exactly what we're talking about with how he has sympathy for Renfrey and the girls that were supposedly cursed under this black sun, because he was experimented on. They were experimented on. Their experiments were worse. They were just kind of locked in a tower. There was no like, let's see how awesome we can make this kid and maybe he'll survive. So Geralt's treatment was at least more benefit to him, even though they didn't give a crap whether he lived or died. Really, it wasn't. They weren't doing it for him. They were doing it like Stregobor says. It's the ends justify the means. If we can make Witcher, if we can make these humans that can kill monsters that make humans safe, isn't it worth it if a few extra humans die? After all the monsters are going to get killed by these Witchers. We're saving lives later. That's their justification, right? And
he's like providing a service to the people, and that's how badly they treat him.
Yeah,
it's so crazy.
So it's like, Stregobor's argument is interesting, but Geralt is the product of people making that argument. He exists because people won that argument. People on Stregobor's side won that argument because, well, heck, they're the magic users. They have the power. They who's actually right or wrong philosophically is beside the point to a certain extent, because the mages have decided and they're going to experiment and do this, and do creepy things and make magic beings like that thing that chases Yennefer in the show, and that Queen of Lyria, that Edir
crab spider. I like that.
Yeah, that thing is a creation of magic. Like, that comes up later. We won't, talk about that specifically, but that's an example of something that was created by magic. And, if it gets loose, imagine that thing on the loose, just rampaging, killing, it's a similar kind of concept. But that's also the argument Stregobor uses. He's like, well, we can't have this thing out there running around. But he's like, but Geralt's like, well, that's not a thing. It's a person, right? So it's such a conundrum. It's really well done. It's hard to really firmly take either side 100% of the way. Like, even if you side with, I tend to side with don't experiment on people, don't believe in curses. But this is a world where curses are real. So you can't be like 100% like, oh no, there's no way. There's no way. You got to leave some room open for, well, maybe.
This is
it doesn't mean you kill people in result because this curse is real, but it does create conundrums.
Geralt says the same thing to Filavandrel in the show. It's not as it's the edge of the world. This is one of the short stories that I wish would have been expanded more in the show. But Geralt tells Filavandrel, he's like, "Don't call me human." He tells him, he's like, "Listen," and that's part of Geralt's plight, right? He's like, "Listen," he used to be human, but at the same time, he's not treated like a human by the people. So that's why he can, that's why his connection with Renfrey is much stronger than the one with Stregobor's, and that's what makes this so tragic in the end.
Social outcasts, they're social outcasts, but it's amplified because they're social outcasts in a way that isn't possible in our world, but it's understandable that they're so good at something or so separated from humans based on who they are that they have a hard time having normal relationships. Renfrey's relationships have mostly been power dynamics. Like, she's either been controlled or been controlled people. Like, you see how tight a lock she has on her group. Like, this guy Sivril, the half-elf, is portrayed as a real nasty guy. He starts laughing about something and Renfrey's like, "Stop laughing now," or "Stop laughing immediately." And the text says, "Sivril, stop laughing immediately." It's like, so this is this nasty piece of work, dude, that just like it takes on a dime, takes her orders. So that just really tells you how powerful she is, how intense she is, how commanding she is, and how good she is. Because I don't mean good like a good person. I mean how skilled she is. Like, she is good with a sword. No match for Geralt, as it turns out. But that's part of what we're being entered. That's part of the story. Geralt really is, which isn't necessarily clear from the get-go. It's funny. Every once in a while, we're reminded throughout the stories that this guy is unbelievable at fighting. But not everyone else in the world knows that. They're like, oh, surely the stories aren't true. Surely Witchers aren't that good at fighting. And someone challenges him, and well,
could we argue that Renfrey's addiction is revenge? And I actually read this article the other day that like 80% of addiction stems from trauma, and I actually believe that. You know what I mean? I've seen addiction in my family. I'm not going to go into a long story, but I've seen people that have been hurt for a specific reason, and that's part of the reason why they can't get over a specific thing that happened in their life, which causes them to ultimately never be able to move on, right, from what happened to them. And that's kind of the thing that that is really beautiful about this chapter. It makes you think like, hey, how do we treat people? This idea of duty versus ethics for Geralt. People say he doesn't have emotion, but look at the decision he makes. You know what I mean? It's so incredibly difficult for him.
You can't tell someone, you can't make someone forgive, right? It has to be their choice and it's up to them, right? Like Geralt's, and in this case, Geralt's saying you have to forgive him. Well, you don't have to forgive him. You just have to not kill all these innocent people. That's really what he's concerned with. He wouldn't, if it was just about Stregobor, he would be like, yeah, you probably shouldn't do that. But he's not. He gets involved because innocents are involved. That's what really moves him finally. At the end, he's like, he obviously doesn't care that much about Stregobor. He doesn't like the guy. But when it comes down to innocence, that's touches on the things that he was taught. Like he was taught to protect innocence. We're given his original origin story, his first monster hunting example, where it's very similar to it's a microcosm of Renfrey's story, which is that he's walking down the road like, hey, I'm a new Witcher. I can't wait to go rescue my first group of people. He's all full of himself, thinking he's a good guy.
Naivete like Jon Snow, a lot of that.
Yeah, very true. He thinks that the Night's Watch is a noble calling, where actually it's a bunch of scumbags, and some of them are noble calling, whatever. So so very similar. So he goes out and he kills this guy who's raping a girl, and he thinks, oh, now I deserve thanks. He doesn't think like she owes him anything, but he's looking forward to being thanked, like just being recognized as a good person. But the reality of it is she's like so disturbed, and she's vomiting, and there's blood everywhere, and she's like terrified and traumatized. Like she's in no fit state for thanking someone. She was just raped. Like that's what's still in her head. She's still experiencing this thing that happened. And so if you can't ever let that go, well, that's up to her. We didn't experience that. We don't know what it's like. And so Geralt's involving himself in something he doesn't really understand, even though he thinks he understands. And so this is why he doesn't get involved. This is part of why he has this detachment, is because you think you're doing good, and you can actually make things worse sometimes. Like do-goodery has severe consequences sometimes. 2, emotionally, he's traumatized in his own way by expecting people to thank him, and in fact getting the opposite. And so he's like, I'm not even going to go there. I'm not going to stick my heart out there hoping to be praised and loved, only to be stomped on. So I'm not even going to go there. I'm not even going to put my heart out there. I'm just going to go do my job and be this kind of detached being. And so the lesser evil is kind of the beginning of him becoming less detached and showing, hey, actually, man, there are good things in society to be a part of. And it's kind of him coming back, which is a great theme. I like that.
I want to read another part of the chapter here on page 100. Of course, Geralt interrupted again, and no doubt she wasn't head over heels in love with her stepdaughter. She preferred her own children to inherit the throne. I can guess what followed. How could nobody throttled her? And you too, while they were at it. And then we see Stregobor, like, this is how bad of a person Stregobor is. We organized the manhunt, continued Stregobor, but all traces of the little one had disappeared. I had to leave Creighton in a hurry because Fedifolk was beginning to suspect something. And then we get later on, Aradea hired assassins to kill a kid. So, like,
she's not a good person.
Let's talk a little bit. You have talk about a little bit of the Trident ultimatum a little bit more after us.
Okay.
Yeah.
No, sure. Yeah. So basically, what we have is it's a little bit like, vaguely like, but different, but vaguely like the not the most recent Joker movie, but the one before with Heath Ledger, where there's two people on boats and they both kind of have like, well, they both have a button to trigger the bomb, and says if you don't blow this up, then the others are going to blow you up. So it's not the people aren't confronted with killing each other. That's the twist that the Joker creates. But it's the same basic situation where you have let the bad guys go or more good guys die. And of course, if you let the bad guys go, well, they're going to go out and kill more good guys anyway. So either way, good guys are going to die. And so, and the reason I bring up the Joker movie is because the prisoner played by that actor Zeus says, well, there's only one thing you can do here is not play. And he throws the trigger out the window, and he's like, well, hopefully the people on the other boat do the same thing. The only way out of this is to not participate. Now, of course, that's an interesting philosophical argument, and you can see the point there. And when Zeus does that in the movie, you're like, yes, that is the right thing to do. But when Geralt does it, it's not the right thing to do, because when Zeus does it, it actually undermines the Joker's plan. But here, the plan is not undermined by not participating. Here, Geralt is like, stepping back doesn't solve the problem. In fact, it possibly makes it worse. It definitely doesn't help, though. And so the Trident ultimatum in this case is the half-elf Sivril capturing a boat full of people and saying, I'm going to kill people. We're killing people on this boat. And the city was named Trident. We're going to kill people on this boat until you let our friends free. And the friends are, of course, bloodthirsty killers just like him.
A bunch of people were killed, like was it dozens or something?
I believe it was a dozen before the mayor finally capitulated and was like, okay,
they were
fine.
going to do this like kind of like Red Wedding type shit.
Yeah.
They didn't do it.
It's so nasty. So
and they let some people free. There was a blackfish that got out.
Yeah, exactly. So that's why I think it's super interesting that the way the story is very efficient, because Sivril this adds to how dark of a character Sivril is. He's really nasty, and he too. One of the reasons he's laughing, and he's particularly hateful towards Geralt, and you can see some of his own trauma, because half elves do not have good lives on the continent either. Well, they're also rejected. Yeah, they're rejected by both halves as well. So Sivril, there's a little bit of pathos here. Sivril is kind of projecting, even though he's a really minor character that has a very brief screen time. You get the sense that he is also a social reject that's become dark and evil, in part because of that, a brutal guy because no one accepts him. He's got no love in his life either. But also it just shows you that, like I talked about before, just how incredible of a personality Renfri is, because someone that dark and dangerous and bloody follows Renfri's orders to the letter. And usually guys like that, kind of have their own way. They're like, they don't follow orders so directly. They don't they do their own thing. So it tells us so much. There's so much you can say just about these little interactions, the way her gang is laid out and the way they interact with each other. So great depth. Love it. Yeah,
it's crazy because like he held all these pilgrims hostage because he wanted his friends to be released. So it's like this lesser evil conflict again. He's like, okay, am I going to kill all these people? I want my friends to be released. You know what I mean? So it's like this person has been shaped by, I have in our outline here, nature versus nurture and nature versus nature, which is something that is, something that is obviously happening. We see throughout this chapter for sure. So, and in the real world, like what if you have some young kid and he's born and he like as a 2-year-old baby or a 2-year-old toddler starts torturing animals? What do you do about that? I mean, you take the kid to therapy, I suppose, but Joffrey, I mean, what if it doesn't work? Like, what do you do? Like, as a society, that's a real thing we're faced with. Thankfully, these kids aren't also born with superhuman magical powers and things like that, but they are born with the ability to exist in society without us knowing they're there and to get into places of power. Like they can get into politics. They can get into law enforcement. They can get into, I'm not even trying to be political. That happens. Like really evil, bad people want power. And so they try to get where there's power, which is in, whether it's the White House or whether it's I'm going to say this right now,
room or whatever.
I have to interject right now. Donald Trump is what happens when you let a Joffrey grow up. Just saying.
Yeah, no.
That's I had to say that. I'm sorry about getting political, but that's exactly how I view it anyways.
Well, it is the kind of concept we're talking about, even if even for the 1% of people who wouldn't agree with you there, it's the concept is what we're getting at. That's the point. And I certainly agree with you on both. I agree with you. And
like the argument of killing a baby Hitler, like that's been talked about.
Right. Like, should we have, like, would you go back and kill baby Hitler if you could? Well, is that really, like, is that your only option? Can we go back and just give baby Hitler a different life? He probably does, like, maybe that's the better option. I mean, maybe not, though. Maybe no matter what, he comes out that way. I don't believe that. I think that they're not going to, upbringing has so much to do. But there are probably some exceptions where upbringing is not going to solve the problem. And that's the conundrum we're presented with here. This conundrum is like dialed up to 11 because there's magic involved. There's like, yeah, this person isn't just a threat to society. This person is a threat to all human beings. Yeah. Which is entirely different consideration. And that is where we get into the Game of Thrones stuff, where you can see the parallel where Tywin argues, well, isn't it better to kill one person at dinner than 10,000 on a battlefield? Never mind that he actually did kill 10,000 at dinner, but that's, a whole different set of conundrums there.
From Geralt's perspective, it's like much more favorable to avoid conflict rather than being accused of being a murderer or committing an unlawful act. But I think he also understands that an action can result in something much worse, like the death of innocent people, which is why he kills Renfrey. And Geralt, we talked about his reputation earlier. He does earn himself this nickname, the Butcher of Blaviken. We see, all these different nicknames or, false titles, Master Irian for Stregobor, like this misrepresentation of who he really is. Not something that Andrzej is doing in this chapter. He's trying to do the very best to avoid the worst possible case scenario, and also ultimately has to make that choice of duty versus ethics. The Jon Snow choice. Do I kill Daenerys or do I let her kill a bunch of people? Do I let this?
You're right.
This, and
Game of Thrones uses it as a climax. This issue, like, what's the lesser evil here? What's she gonna do if we don't kill her, and what's she gonna do if we do, or what's gonna happen if we do, rather? Yeah, and Jon does not ever feel terribly confident that he did the right thing. This is like he's just tortured by that thought. He's like, did I do the right thing? Did I do the right thing? And so is Geralt. That's the problem here. Geralt's like, and Stregobor, he taunts him with that. He's like, you're never gonna know whether you did the right thing or not.
A lot of people have made the comparison of Geralt being a combination of Ned and Jon, which I actually like, because Geralt is kind of this, like this fatherly figure to Ciri, and Ciri's this, like, Jon Snow in exile, this noble in exile. So we're doing more Game of Thrones comparisons.
Yeah, I mean, the aging is a big part of Jon being so young. Jon kind of comes off as like, well, that's part of why why George kills him, and to have him come back, and it makes him, it sort of ages him. It makes him wiser. It has him. He goes through something that gives him wisdom. It's a part of the hero's journey.
I'll never make the same mistake again. That, because he is this young guy with naivete. One thing I want to do before we continue going on here, I want to thank everybody for joining us today. If you haven't checked out Aziz's channel, all the links to his website and podcast and all that is in the description of this video, so it's super easy to find. I see that some of the moderators have been sharing the Witcher Addicts group, which is an absolutely fantastic group. I think it's 3,000 plus people now. I think it was like 1,000 like just a month ago. So Shelby and Stacy and awesome other people from there, and I know people are watching there. Chrissy and Shelby, if you want to share the link in the description of the video, great place to have Witcher discussions, or if you just want to share memes, talk about The Witcher 3, that kind of stuff. So that's a great place to do that. Of course, if you do want to help support the channel, you can hit that join button or toss a coin to your Witchers. Anything that anybody does donate on the stream, I usually split with them later when I do see them at conventions. I see Aziz 2 or 3 times a year. We use it for all sorts of stuff. So, and that really helps out the channel. So, you can subscribe to the channel if you're enjoying this. Pardon me. My coffee went down the wrong pipe. That's never good. But if you're enjoying this, lots more Witcher content coming up. And I'm going to do some character profiles real soon.
Good idea. Yeah. That's what drew me to the story in the first place, was those Netflix character profiles. They did 3 of them, Geralt and Yennefer and Ciri, and that was like, this is getting definitely piquing my interest. By the way, you probably know this already, but I did not I only learned this 2 days ago that jaskier is the Polish word for dandelion.
For buttercup, the flower buttercup.
Oh, cool. Yeah. I figured you knew that already, but since I just learned it, I had to make sure everybody else knows it.
So yeah, how much more do we have in our line? We
a
covered
little bit, not a ton.
Yeah.
You know, there's always more to be said, but we've definitely covered most of the major points anyway.
Yeah, once again, thanks everyone for joining us in chat. Happy Friday, everyone.
Yeah.
I keep on forgetting my date. It's because it's winter here. We've got so much goddamn snow. I kind of lose track of time during the winter. But yeah, really, you know, the Last Wish. My personal favorite book in this series is The Lady of the Lake.
Okay.
And you know, there's an argument to be made for. I like all of them, but I felt like it got a proper, real conclusion. But The Last Wish is. Like, you know, I know a lot of people are jumping into Blood of Elves. I think you did that first, and then you went back and read the short stories, right? Aziz, you read the main plotline.
Started Blood of Elves mistakenly, or thinking it was the actual first book, and I read it a little more than half of it. Then I realized I was supposed to read The Last Wish, and I went back and read that before finishing Blood of Elves. So I'll have a more proper reading order this time through. But yeah, it was just a slight detour there. Something else I did think of randomly that I don't even know if this is, maybe other people can fill this in or tell me I'm wrong. I was trying to think about the name Renfrey, because we have so many, we have, you know, this reference to all these references to Snow White. I was wondering if there's anything about her name, because Renfrey is an unusual name, and I don't know, I haven't found it anywhere else in the world. I noticed that it's an anagram for Fenrir, which, you know, the wolf of the Norse apocalypse, which is which is possibly what is being referenced there, because, you know, if she's a part of the Curse of the Black Sun, well, their whole thing is to end the world. So,
and Fenrir is chained to the earth and loses his magical ability. All these sort, definitely in the North. Bran Stark is a great parallel for Fenrir. If you're
yeah. So I wonder about that, but I have only kind of noticed that last night, so I haven't been able to do a lot of research.
There is a lot of Norse stuff, yeah, especially in the games too. Like when you get later on in Witcher 3.
Oh yeah, I bet.
There's a lot of great Norse mythology. I should probably do a video on that. That's a great idea, Aziz. I love that you brought that up. I didn't think about it. It's like fairy tales and stuff like that. But there is, I think he does take a lot more from Norse mythology than you know, kind of any other mythology.
And it makes sense, because if he loves to insert all these stuff from fairy tales, well, fairy tales and mythology have a lot in common in terms of the way they're presented. They're grand, they're super fantastical. There's things that just don't make sense, but that's part of their shtick. And they're supposed to be from long, long ago. Right.
Well, you know what's really interesting? If we go back to episode 4, let's do book versus show comparison. We'll talk a little bit about that, as we talked a lot. We'll get a little bit back into The Last Wish at the end here. One thing that I want to point out is, if we're talking about Norse mythology, the symbol of Jormungandr, which is the serpent that encircles the world. If you look at where Ciri and Pavetta get wed, there is actually the symbol of infinity between the worlds, and there's one circle in the middle, but on the outside, it does this 8, and it kind of represents this, because really, like, we see, you know, the theme of rebirth, death, love, all of that. You know, the cycle of the hero's journey is definitely something that we see in most fantasy, especially for Ciri, because she's comes from noble blood and magical. So I found, if you go look at that scene again, you'll see that symbol. There's that big pattern on the floor, and there's a lot more to that. I don't want to spoil what happens there, but there's definitely this, and especially because the law of surprise, right? This idea of destiny, what that really means, and then that, if you go a little bit deeper into that, I think you'll understand why Ciri is so important to this.
I also wonder too, just as far as the law of surprise, where the inspiration for that comes from. If he may be just something he made up on his own, but I wonder if there's some old fairy tale or some old mythical story where that is a feature, or, you know. Now that we're on that track, I just feel like I just want to turn over every stone and find more.
Well, in medieval culture, the idea of betrothal, we see obviously, you know, predetermined marriages, you know, these families, you know, the joining of houses.
That's very true.
We see that, but it is, It is more magical, definitely, in The Witcher. It has there's a little twist there. I'm not gonna spoil it. There's some twists in there, which is why you gotta read the books.
Okay, so in the chat, someone says Renfrey is a name of Gaelic origin and means warrior of darkness. Well, that also fits pretty darn well. Damn.
With Fenrir.
Cool. Nice. Yeah.
The wolf and the moon symbolism.
Mm-hmm. And her being a great fighter and with a dark streak to her.
People are saying Rumpelstiltskin in chat.
Oh yeah, Rumpelstiltskin. That name even comes up in the series, doesn't it?
So yeah,
I need to look more into that one.
So one thing I kind of want to talk about a little bit, Aziz, is the market, and because that is definitely something that's fleshed out a lot more in the books. I'm not necessarily angry with the change because there's a lot that happens there. What did you think about the adaptation in the show version of all of that and the stuff in the books? Because there is some pretty big differences. Yeah,
there's some pretty big differences. I really like the show's version of it. I was disappointed with a few things that they took out, but adaptations, they got to do that. It's fine. They wanted to. It's a different presentation. They're trying to reach TV audiences instead of literary audiences. It's there's just different things they're trying to do. I wish there had been more of the Snow White homage in there. That was kind of lost. But I like the emphasis on. I mean, they did keep the apple at least. That was cool, and a few other things. But I appreciate the general reaction of the general theme of the lesser evil. That was captured very well. The whole conundrum of who's right, who's wrong, mixed in with not having all the information, mixed in with knowing that both sides have reason to lie. That was all captured really well, and that's the most important thing. So good. So that's that to me, they did the number one thing right, and then they did a good job with showing how Witchers are rejected. They did a good job of showing how how he got his nickname, the Butcher of Blaviken. For some people, it wasn't clear because of the timeline stuff, which I know that was, we don't have to talk about that specifically, but that is a reason why people were confused. Me having read the book, obviously I wasn't confused by that, but I do think it's super important to set Geralt up that way to show that he too is a rejected member of society, like Renfrey, in a different kind of way. And that gives him something in common, which carries forward throughout the rest of the series. Jaskier is also kind of an outcast. He's just a real happy-go-lucky outcast, but he doesn't have lots of relationships and friends. Like he's terrible with women. He keeps like having relationships and getting fights and getting kicked out. And he's just not good at maintaining anything. So it's like Geralt. So anyway, that's a bit of a tangent. Excuse me. So I like the that they maintained the menace of Renfrey's gang and showed that they, she's an interesting character, but these guys following her are bad dudes, just straight up. They're not as compelled. They're not like supposed to be like, well, maybe some of these guys are decent guys if you were to look at it a certain way. Even with the stuff with Sivril having compelling reasons for being the way he is, it's not like you don't get the sense that they are rehabilitated. You could rehabilitate them. They're just bad dudes that need to be put down. And so it's a bit of character building for Geralt to show, okay, we need to see right away how badass this guy is. We need to know, it needs to be established along with these other things. And they certainly did that in the show, showed him being incredible, and that was fun.
Well, I think, one thing that the book had more is Geralt has a long conversation, two long conversations about the Trident Ultimatum. One with the town's mayor, which is not adapted in the show. And I think that definitely would have made the episode less exciting for sure. It's not explained, because it's not really explained why Geralt ran to the market, but we understand. It's like, oh, okay, like something bad's going to happen there. But there's these long explanation. There's just like longer buildup in the books, which is, You know, there has been some people that are like, you know.
Yeah, in his head, in the book, in his head, he realized it, but that's kind of hard to present in the show. Like he kind of wakes up and goes, "Wait a sec," you know, like I just figured it out. But yeah, that would be hard to communicate. And I agree. In general, that's just a challenge for the adaptation because Geralt's internal story is pretty interesting, and some of that gets lost. But the books are just full of dialogue and really interesting conversations. And there's nothing stopping them from putting most of those in, which I'm really looking forward to because that's a great strength of the Witcher novels is the dialogue, the conversations they're had.
You know, Geralt is not really choosing a side. Like when I read it, that's how I felt. But he made, you know, the conscious choice of protecting the people, and I think that was the real clear thing that they focused on in the show, that they wanted to, you know, like Geralt had to, you know, just do this thing, like he had this hard choice to make, and then that's definitely that's a one big change, I think. Like, you know, there's more with Marika. There obviously, when you're reading more with the books, same thing with Song of Ice and Fire, you're getting a lot more exposition with characters and conversations and stuff like that. I felt like the pacing was appropriate. Like I felt like the episode was nicely paced. I didn't have an issue with that.
I think too the idea that after all the philosophy and the discussion, everyone just does what's they most wanted to do. Like Renfrey is like, when it all comes down, she's like, no, I'm going after him. It's my revenge. Stragobor in the end, he's like, I'm protecting myself no matter what, and I still want to research this curse and figure it out. And Geralt's like, well, at the end, I'm just going to protect people. You know, everybody just kind of goes to their most basic, like no one's arguments moves anyone. They all just have to, oh, well, we all just have to do what we do here because no one's going to back down. And I like that's very realistic in a lot of ways. People just, you know, they know, intellectually they know not to do something, but we just, well, we do it anyway. We're human. We're compelled. We have feelings.
I guess like one thing that I hope doesn't happen with The Witcher is like I'm not knocking the Game of Thrones community because there's so many hardcore fans, but like you got to show me one adaptation who took every single piece from a book and made it work. You know what I mean? Like obviously we could have benefited from more episodes in Game of Thrones. There's no denying that.
Oh yeah,
right?
Yeah.
But I think that like, you know, a lot of people have been criticizing the showrunners Choice Law and Hisrich and, you know, kind of the timeline stuff in the first season, but I really didn't think they cut any corners, like in like too many corners in my opinion, other than Edge of the World. Like that one was just like super truncated.
Well, that's a really interesting thing because if we're talking about the adaptation, like the challenge, Game of Thrones, probably the easiest season to adapt was season 1, whereas this for The Witcher might go down as the hardest because it wasn't there. They needed to do some maneuvering based on the way the short stories are built. Like I think everybody knows by now that Ciri you just wouldn't have Ciri till season 2 without timeline chicanery. So those are the two choices. Either it's almost like the lesser evil. They're like, well, either we don't have this incredibly important character until season 2, or we do timeline chicanery. And those are their two choices. That's it. And so, but there's flaws with both of those things. And so the timeline chicanery, it creates fewer problems than not introducing Ciri till season 2.
And look at how successful it was, even with that. So the fact that, you know, there's more of the streamlining with blood, you know, we're getting into Blood of Elves. I assume there will be some sort of Destiny stuff, you know, Shard of Ice, stuff like that, some stuff with Yennefer and Ishtar.
I would think so, yeah.
Think so. But this, you know, we still might get some more of The Last Wish, you know, Nivellen, that kind of stuff. Let's talk about the end of the chapter because this really showcases, you know, Geralt will not let Stragobor touch her dead body, take it for an autopsy. And everybody has literally seen Geralt just massacre these people in the town. That's how he gets the name of the Butcher of Blaviken. He's standing despite all the people are stoning him and doing all these terrible things. So this is an incredibly tough moment for Geralt that really, you know, shaped his, like, you know, he's obviously been treated like this before, but this shows kind of how people have treated him. This is like a real lens into that.
Yeah, this is part of why he's this is a big part of why he's an outcast. And it's why that we brought up and why the story brings up his first time saving anybody and how he was treated after that and how that sets the tone for how everyone's going to treat him for the most part. And I think it's super interesting that he's that the perspective here is super important to keep track of all the people's perspective. We talked about Renfrey's perspective on why she wants to kill Stregobor. We talked about Stregobor's perspective on the curse. We talked about Geralt's perspective on protecting people, that being his bottom line. But the regular townsfolk here, they don't know any of this. All they saw was some famous, well-known Witcher guy who they don't know that much about, other than that he's famous and then the Witcher. Just seemingly slaughtered 7 people at the market. They don't know any of the stuff about the Curse of the Black Sun. They don't know anything about Stregobor and Renfrey's history. They don't know who any of these people even are. All they know is that some dude killed a bunch of people in the market, and that's a big no-no. It's like, who the hell are you, murderer, you know? And that's part of why we get the presentation we get in episode 2, which is presented differently in the books, but it's simplified a little bit, but in a way that I think is real well done, because it's to the point. That's what Jaskier is doing. He comes along and he calls Geralt the Butcher of Blaviken, and Geralt punches him because he really does not like that name. And Jaskier, to his credit, realizes that. He's like, oh, he doesn't like that name. He knows that's what people call him, but he didn't know that Geralt didn't like that name until Geralt very demonstratively showed he didn't like that name. He's like, I get it. You don't like that name. Well, hey, I'm a bard. My songs are pretty good. I'm famous too. If I write a song favorable to you, that's going to do a lot for your reputation. That'll help restore your reputation. And of course, it's so awesome that Toss a Coin to Your Witcher is actually, so catchy. So it actually could see why it would catch on.
Soundtrack comes out today, I believe.
Yeah, I think. Oh,
Spotify.
Yeah, you're right. It's the 24th. That's what they said. You're totally right. I think it's today. Yeah.
I'm going to purchase that and put it on repeat.
So so that's very true. Like what you said there. So the perspective is super important. That's people's perspective is very different than Geralt's perspective is very different from Stregobor's, is very different from Renfrey's, and even very different from Renfrey's gang. They don't know the full history of Renfrey either. Probably she probably hasn't told them everything. She just
they have an argument. They have an argument at the end about like if she's cursed or not, and Geralt's like, don't fucking touch her body.
Absolutely. And he says that Stregobor argues that Geralt was hypnotized by her. Like when she does that, she has this way of getting people to follow her, which there's some evidence for that. I pointed out he stops laughing immediately. It's presented, maybe she just has a lockdown and she's just got such authority, they just do what she says. On the other hand, maybe there is magic involved. Maybe he's like slightly, for lack of a better word, bewitched. And maybe there's some truth to it. And we don't know. And Geralt hypnotizes her a little bit when they're in the room together. He's trying to get her to, and she kind of leans into it. He's like, oh yeah, you got me. I'm not going to go kill him. But
it's actually a little bit of foreshadowing, for why Geralt is the way he is with women. Like with Yennefer, like they have, obviously they're bound by this wish. The Last Wish is the name of the book. We see it later on, but I think that is something that's important too. Like and it goes back to trauma, like a mother's love, like these like the way these people were brought up in the world. Like Renfrey was, her stepmother was trying to kill her, man. And
Geralt's mother left him, so that's why he leaves women, because he leaves before they leave him. That's a very classic psychological trope. Sometimes it's like it can go one of two ways, generally speaking, in books and TV and movies. Like you have a womanizer who's just a scumbag that goes around sleeping with women just to gratify himself. Then you have someone like Geralt, who's not just out for gratification. He's lonely and is constantly and is frequently taken advantage of, rather than the other way around. And he runs away because he's afraid of them running away first.
That's why when Yennefer and Geralt get together for the first time, it said they have found peace for the first time in their lives when they make love. And it's like that's what he
wants to get that feeling back every time. The smells and everything remind him of that one. It's one time he was.
I miss your presence when you're not there in the bed. All of that.
Yeah.
So I think that's a pretty. I mean, we're in an hour and a half here. I know, Aziz, you have to leave around 4 to go prepare for your game stream. Let's do about 15. You have 15, 20 minutes to do a couple questions from the chat, and then we'll wrap it up.
Absolutely. Actually, let me just say I'm probably doing the game stream today.
Yeah.
I might start a little bit late, but we finished one of our scripted episodes. We did House Blackwood Part 1, Ancient History of House Blackwood, and that's going to be up for patrons today, and then up for the public by next Friday. So that'll be the first thing I do after we finish here, and then I'll do the game stream. So hopefully I can do both. I'm pretty sure I can do both.
I saw Chase editing process video, which wrapped up into a minute. All that
that was really cool.
I hate editing; it's the bane of my existence. But you got to do it as a creator.
It is the worst part for sure, other than reading YouTube comments.
True.
Just kidding.
So we'll take some questions from chat. You can post them to Aziz or me, or we can both answer them. Let's do this. This has been really fun. And happy Friday again, everyone. Thanks for joining us.
So what questions do we have here?
Or just comments. We can read out some of this.
I see one here. Yeah. Oh,
the last one has a YouTube channel, by the way.
Oh, yeah.
Very brand new. He's a Canadian. Go subscribe to his channel.
And Laughing Storm makes a point here. Why would you want to make a connection to someone you're going to live 8 times as long? That's a good point. That's part of the reason Geralt and Yennefer's relationship works a little better than either of them could have with non-magically altered people, because sorceresses, mages, and witchers all have greatly expanded lifespans. And so, yeah, if you're with like a regular person, they're gonna be aging and getting old while you're still the same age, and that creates all sorts of relationship issues. So
the idea of leaving a
very small.
Right?
Yeah. So, no, go ahead. That's all. So that does make it tricky. You're right. And, like it's that comes up with like vampire stories. That's a common refrain for those. It's a reason. Like if you make me one of you, I won't age either. Then we'll be this way together. It's a very recurrent. But now that is not a trope in The Witcher, because you can't just make anyone into a Witcher. You can't just make anyone into a sorceress. You can't. Yeah, you gotta have stuff has to happen for that. You can't.
We have a question in chat, Aziz. Stacy. Right. Says, was Renfrey's real mother of elven blood? Her father is a human, and she's unnamed her mother. I think that's a yes.
It's possible, but I don't. Yeah. It's definitely not explained. I don't know. One trick there is I think there's maybe some genetic makeup that may fit. I'm not clear on elven coloring. I don't know if elves are ever blonde or not. Not that
certainly in Lord of the Rings.
Certainly they're in Lord of the Rings. They certainly have the richly colored eyes.
Yeah,
that's a thing. Like Renfrey's blue-green eyes could definitely be elven. That's a big feature for Cirilla, obviously, and some other characters.
The dryads are described as dryads are kind of like elves as well. So there is that connection. It's not.
But I think
exactly.
I think it's. Renfrey's mother isn't mentioned because she's meant to be the brutal Snow White parallel, and neither is Snow White's mother mentioned. The implication is the mother died in childbed in Snow White, so I believe it's not stated that's what happened to Renfrey's mother, but I would guess that's what happened, especially because just her mother clearly dies at some point not long after her birth, because Craden remarries, or Fridefalk remarries.
Yeah, Fridefalk.
Remarries, and the new stepmother is Eridea, and Eridea is the one where all this stuff kicks off. So whoever she was, if she was an elf, she died, which would mean foul play, because she didn't die of old age. Elves don't die of old age.
Well, we know the history of the continent as well. What happened when we have the story of the elves teaching magic to humans, and then they kind of learned that, and we know that elves were the kind of the first bearers of magic, and then they got pushed to the edge of the world. We hear that story of Filavandrel, and we hear it from Istrid as well.
Yeah,
and we hear the gnomes and the halflings were those were more of the mine work, the traditional trope for gnomes and stuff like that. So yeah, there's a strong possibility for that. A lot of there's a lot of precedent for other characters. We get a lot of connection to other characters. Yennefer is a quarter blood elf, and then we see other people that are half blood, and we see these anti-elven attitudes, and Renfrey's story is very similar to the stories of a lot of people who are treated this way, like Geralt. So
yeah,
great question.
Yeah, that's a good question.
Laughing Storm. Why are there seemingly so uber powerful chosen one elves who have a destiny?
Well, I think what we I think there are certainly probably more examples of this that would probably be explored as the Witcher universe is expanded. There probably would come up. We'd probably be told of more examples of such things that aren't part of the main novels because they just weren't relevant. But yeah, with the depth of Elven history that's sure to be out there, I would expect that there would be more of this. On the other hand, it's a theme that gets only barely touched on it to this point. It's something that comes up more in the later books, so I'll have to dance around a few spoilers. But the getting into the nature of elven magic and why elves are the way they are is a big part of it, and it touches on some of the same ideas of what happens after you exist for a really long time. What does that do to you? What does that affect? Like, how does that affect your psyche? Does that corrupt you? Does that make you better? Does it make you worse? Generally speaking, it seems to make people worse because you get corrupted, and you have less a sense of humanity. You have less a sense of you don't honor other life forms as much. Things like that. In some ways you do, some ways you don't. So it's very interesting. It's definitely a big part of things that get explored later. And the idea of destiny for elves is a very big deal because they have, when you mix these two elements of destiny and really long lifespans, it really changes the picture, because a human with a destiny is something that we can kind of maybe perceive a little better because it fits into a human lifespan. But the way people perceive history when they view it over the course of hundreds of years, like our lifespans are too short to look at history in that sense.
Yeah.
We read about it in that sense, but we don't experience it in that sense. So that's one thing Sapowski tries to get into, which I think is a super fascinating thing for a fantasy author to do, is to get into what it's really like to have a long lifespan. It's not a good thing. It can be pretty bad. And this again touches on randomly vampire novels. A lot of vampire novels have gotten into that sort of concept. What happens when you live for 1,000 years, and what kind of person do you become, or what kind of vampire do you become? But it's similar, it's a similar sort of concept of what does that do to a psyche over such a long time.
We see the huge contrast in worldview between Stregobor and Renfri. Like, we see the more egocentric Stregobor, right? Like,
yeah,
the idea of acquiring power.
Yeah, and he thinks that he's focused on a big picture. He's like, well, we need to protect humanity as a whole. He's like, I don't care about a couple individual humans. I care about, and whereas Renfri is very specifically cares about one particular human. She's like, I want to kill this one guy. I care exactly about one human. This one human means everything to me. Killing him is super important. Whereas Stregobor he's supposedly concerned with the fate of humanity as a whole, and he is a guy that has this worldview, right or wrong, because is partly shaped because he has this huge lifespan, whereas Renfri has a human length lifespan and hasn't been alive for hundreds of years. So again, perspective is made massively important in this short story and throughout the novels.
Elder blood is super important, as AC/DC Barca says. It is something that goes all the way to the end of the books, and certainly shapes people's motives for specific decisions they make.
Yeah, it fits with what I was just saying, right, about the multi-generations of people. If you can watch 500 years, you can actually see genetics playing out in real time. Whereas like scientists in the real world, they play with genetics in ways that the long term is a different thing. Like, long term to them is like weeks or months or a few years, whereas long term to Stregobor is 100 years.
He's like 550 some years old or something like that.
Yeah,
I can't remember exactly, but he's like old. Maybe
there's another reason Geralt understands Renfri a little more. Now Geralt's old too, but he's nowhere near Stregobor old. So
yeah. Oh, thank you for that question. Appreciate that. There was another one. Zorpian Live, a friend from my hometown in Sault Ste. Marie. What's going on, Mike? Was Geralt human before he was made into a Witcher? Can non-humans be made into Witchers as well? Yes, Geralt was human. But the thing is, though, is, without spoiling too much, Geralt's mother is special. Should we just say it? I guess we could talk about it. Geralt's mother,
I mean, it's in the show. So.
Yeah, Geralt's mother was a sorceress.
Yeah.
So I think part of the reason why he's a very special Witcher as well. I think so. Yeah, and
it's heavily implied without being confirmed that he's his own bloodlines are part of why he got through the trials farther. He was more resistant to the mutations. Yeah.
There's a couple of specific quests in The Witcher 3. One of the main quests, which Vesemir and the other Witchers are trying to do an experiment. One of the Witchers, Lambert. He talks about he's like he's very cross with Geralt because he never wanted to be made into a Witcher. He's like, I never wanted to be like this. You know what I mean? And then humans are the ones that are more traditionally turned to them. But they've tried it with other species and stuff like that, and didn't necessarily work.
Yeah, and they were designed. It was made by humans for humans. Because they were trying to survive. It was a way for humans to carve out their ecological evolutionary niche in a world full of monsters. So it was like,
and also they're standing in society because they provide service, and it's like, the idea of power and survival that goes into it as well. But I don't want to spoil too much of that because Vesemir, there will be conversations with Vesemir when he comes in the show and other Witchers when they introduce them, and they all kind of had different viewpoints on that. But that's a great question, Mike. Thank you for that. See anything else we can talk about here? Toss a coin to your YouTuber. Value plenty.
Let's just without spoilers. Yeah, bloodlines are important, and this magical blood it is familiar in a sense to, in a more direct sense than Game of Thrones, but in a way that's sort of familiar to other fantasy stories where you may like a special gene may pop up, or
that's why I referenced Azor Ahai earlier. It is similar to that
series. Ones, like that kind of thing, like Child of Destiny. That's a super recurring theme in a lot of stories. Yeah, little fun trope to play with.
There's what I love too about this is there's so many different people in chat. Like, Mike says my only experiences with the show. And then we have some people who have read all the books, and some people who have played the games. So we have Mindy Martin says, I played The Witcher 3, and to this day, is my all-time favorite game. I actually just played it last night. And I saw someone saying they're going to, was talking to someone on Twitter today. They're playing the DLC. So I just love the fact that season 1 of this show has opened up the world, because there really is this great history and lore, and just such a great background. It's a great graphic.
Yeah, I do like it a lot. Yeah.
And they've said the show specifically will be mostly about the books, but there's been small little nods to funny little stuff from the games. I think that they will like do to appease fans.
Like apparently that isn't the bathtub scene from the game.
Yes, it's similar. It's similar.
It had the feel to it. Like it was meant to as an homage, not like the content of it, but just the idea. Yeah.
And I think we'll one thing. Well, this is a great question. AC/DC Barca, they're going to be doing Nightmare of the Wolf. They're going to be doing this story. They're doing, I believe, a season of it or a movie as a companion, as set like this threat to the continent. They're making an anime of The Witcher for Netflix to accompany with the show. To kind of like give more context to the world.
Yeah.
Like stuff that happened on the continent. So that's going to be really exciting to see what they do with that.
I wonder about that too. Yeah, because I don't know what the source material for that is. I heard about that yesterday when it was dropped, but this is so new that I don't really know the full story behind it, what they're doing with it. I don't even know if I don't suppose it's all even been announced, but it's good news. No matter what, anyway you look at it, as far as I'm concerned, it's more content. And that's fun.
One thing that I do also want to say is like the reason I picked The Lesser Evil for the first episode of the Witcher book club, and this is a great comment from Zorpian Live, my friend Mike. Also, Henry was the perfect casting in my position. I feel like he played Geralt fantastically, and like episode 1, I feel like was such a great adaptation of what happened in this specific Lesser Evil story, and Geralt, Henry Cavill as Geralt, really does capture a lot of these moments, like the bar scene and all of these conversations with Renfrey, and just like conversation with Shregor. He captures so much of that nuance of what I was reading and felt when I was reading the Lesser Evil story. Oh my God, this is so good. And that's why I was so hyped when I saw the first episode. I was like, oh man, this does feel faithful. It does feel like they really captured, that ambiance that Andrzej had in the books. But I think that's where we're going to end it here for today, everyone. It's been a really fun discussion. Like I said, this isn't your traditional book club. We did read some stuff from the books. Aziz has some great points about fairy tales. And this is going to be a thing that I continue every Friday. I'm going to be doing the stream every Friday at 2 p.m. We'll continue to go through more chapters through The Last Wish and Sword of Destiny. And that'll probably fill our time quite nicely until we get up until, I mean, it's not coming out until 2021, I believe, the next season. So, so we got lots to cover in the books. I thank everyone for being here today. And yeah, there will be more Witcher content coming next on the channel. What's next for you, Aziz?
Well, with that, we got the House Blackwood episode today, and that'll be up for patrons throughout the week. And then Valeritas episode 3 is this Sunday for Storm of Swords, that's the chapters where Jaime goes to the inn with Brienne, and Arya then goes to that same inn 2 chapters later. It's the same one where Bran heads off north with Mira and Jojen and Hodor. They start their journey and fun stuff like that. So really, we're pretty early in a Storm of Swords, having fun with that. Great going through that again, looking for all the foreshadowing and fun stuff like that. Super cool, keeping the show in mind and everything like that. That's really neat. And yeah, game streams every Friday probably about 2 hours after your book club, because we usually go live around 6. And
Eastern Standard Time, yeah.
Yeah, Eastern Standard. And we have Dance of the Dragons Part 2 with Radio Westeros coming out next month as well. So and some live stream. We got a live stream with Stephen Atwell, 9 Penny Kings Part 2. We're gonna do a live stream with Jeff Hartline of Nauticast about Barris.
Brendan Beefish.
Yeah, Brendan Beefish about Barris and Selmy and Kristen Cole. That's on February 18th. So we have a we're keeping pretty busy over here.
So for all of you that have enjoyed this and want to listen more to Aziz and his awesome content, pardon me, you can find the link to all of his stuff, website, YouTube, podcast, all that stuff in the description of this video. I saw someone ask a question, what will be the next short story you do? I thought it would be cool to go with the prologue. I thought I would do the Striga story next, but maybe you guys can change my mind. How about we do a poll? We'll do a poll on the channel. I'll do a poll on the Witcher Addicts, actually. Everybody that's watching right now, we'll do a poll on the Witcher Addicts, and you guys can decide. And that's how we'll do the book club. We'll try to do it as chronologically as possible, not try to skip the Sword of Destiny or anything like that. But yeah, we'll do another one Friday. I'll do a poll. If you head to the Witcher Addicts, you can find the poll there, and you guys can help me decide we're going to cover next Friday. If you enjoyed this, please subscribe to the channel, like this video, and consider hitting that join button. It really helps out the channel. The support, the money really helps out. So thank you, everyone, for watching. It has been our pleasure, and we'll see you in the next video.
Bye.
Toss a coin.